Violation. Section 7, B, exterior modifications inconsistent with community standards. You've got 72 hours to comply. Karen Langston barely looked up from her clipboard. She'd brought 2 board members for backup, like she expected a fight. I didn't argue. I just reached down, wiped the soot from the chimney cap with a gloved thumb, and said, "That cap's not decoration. It's hand-forged. My dad built it in 1986, 2 years before this HOA existed." Karen smirked. "Doesn't matter. We updated the bylaws in April. Retrofits must meet current aesthetic guidelines. Rustic stonework is no longer compliant. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back." I stood, calm, centered. "I'm Ethan Ridgway, licensed structural engineer. This cabin's been in my family for over 30 years, and I'm not here on vacation. I live here." Her eyes flicked to my work vest like she hadn't registered the logo before. I saw the flicker of recognition. Karen liked control, but she hated expertise she couldn't fake. What she didn't know yet is that this chimney cap, the one they were demanding I remove, wasn't just stone and iron. It was my father's signature, his memorial. He died of a stroke 2 months after carving it. His initials are hidden under the final stone layer. I touch it every morning before I go to work. That cap means something. And if Karen thought I was going to take it down for her PowerPoint aesthetic guidelines, she was going to regret underestimating me. My brother Adam served in the Navy. When he came back in pieces, this was the only place he felt safe. We renovated the lower floor together during his recovery. The ramp, the widened entry, the extra anchors we added when the storms came through in 2021. None of it was for show. Every board and bolt in this place has purpose. Now Karen was standing on our porch, clipboard in hand, pretending we were the problem. "Where are you watching from?" Because this isn't just about a chimney cap. It's about every legacy bulldozed by a form letter, every veteran's porch threatened by a paint code, every grieving son told his memories violate policy. And if Karen thought this would end with me filing a form, she was in for a long winter. I didn't sleep that night, not from fear, but from planning. By morning, I was down at the HOA Community Pavilion, checking the public board. That's where Karen posted every new bylaw, fine notice, and passive-aggressive reminder. I counted 11 new violations taped up. Most of them targeted older cabins, the ones built before the HOA had even formed. The newer homes, with their sleek black metal railings and xeriscaped lawns, not a single mention. And the worst part, most of the owners of those legacy cabins were retirees or veterans. People like the Talbots, who'd been here since '91, or Martha Winslow, who couldn't even shovel her walkway anymore without getting a noise complaint for using a powered snow broom. That's when I saw it, a flyer, bright orange. Mandatory visual consistency survey. Karen was running a paid assessment program to catalog aesthetic inconsistencies across the neighborhood. I pulled the paper down and flipped it over. Each property would be reviewed and scored. Low scores faced escalating fines. The kicker? Her company, Langston Property Design, was getting the contract. So this wasn't just about taste. It was about money. She was monetizing enforcement, making homeowners pay to be judged by her own business. And if they refused, they racked up violation points, which meant more fines and possibly revoked HOA privileges, including access to short-term rental permits. That's when it clicked. The chokehold was economic. The fines weren't just punitive, they were weaponized. Take away someone's rental permit in a mountain town, and you take away their income. Block winter access approvals and insurance coverage can lapse. It's slow erosion disguised as paperwork. Karen didn't want to clean up the neighborhood. She wanted to flip it. I stepped back and watched a couple argue quietly near the dog run. They'd just found a notice on their porch about non-compliant mailbox slope. Ridiculous. I built those mailboxes for free 2 winters ago, after the snowplows knocked them out. I used ADA recommendations for slope and stability. I made a note to check the HOA's insurance terms. If Karen's selective enforcement led to any risk exposure, property damage, code violations, or denied claims, there might be leverage. And with my licensure, I knew where to look. Behind me, a voice muttered, "She's out of control." It was Mrs. Talbot, 82 years old, legally blind in one eye and sharper than anyone gave her credit for. She leaned on her cane and nodded toward the board. "They fined me for my curtains last month," she said. "Claimed the pattern didn't match the exterior aesthetic. My husband picked those curtains before he passed." I didn't say anything. I just folded the orange flyer, tucked it into my jacket, and took one last look at the bulletin board before I left. They were laying out a system, a weapon, and Karen thought no one could see it coming. But I could. The HOA office looked more like a startup pitch room than anything you'd expect in a rustic mountain retreat. Polished concrete floors, framed renderings of future community upgrades, a flat screen looping a slideshow of before and after home facades, all sharp angles and minimalist grays. Nothing human about it. Karen wasn't there, but Dale Matthews was, seated at the front desk, hunched over a spreadsheet. His posture was casual, but the way he looked up when I walked in told me he'd been expecting me. Or maybe he was just waiting for someone to finally say what he couldn't. "I need a copy of the vendor contract for the visual consistency survey," I said, straight to the point. Dale blinked twice, clearly thrown. "That's board internal, not posted yet. Then let's start with the fee breakdown. It's going on the community books, right?" He hesitated, long enough for the printer behind him to whir to life, making the silence feel heavier. Dale didn't move to stop me, but he didn't help either. That was the first crack. He didn't defend Karen's program. He didn't parrot back any bylaws. He just froze. I leaned on the counter. "Look, Dale, I know you served on the HOA before Karen did. You've lived here 20 years. You remember what this place used to be, when we actually helped each other. Before all this," his lips pressed into a tight line. He looked down at his screen, but didn't type. His right hand gripped the edge of the desk, fingernails whitening, small signs, but clear ones. "She's pushing us too fast," he muttered. Not a full sentence, not even a full opinion, but it was something. "Then why are you signing off on this garbage?" I asked. "Fining Martha for curtains? Sending me a tear-down notice for a chimney that predates the HOA? "I didn't vote on that one," he said quickly. "Karen bypassed quorum, called it an emergency variance." His voice dropped lower. "I filed a formal objection. Got buried in subcommittee minutes. That right there told me more than I needed. Dale wasn't in control. He was being run over, but he hadn't quit, which meant part of him still thought he could fix it from the inside. You know this survey is a setup, right? Her company gets paid to evaluate properties she already wants gone. That's a conflict of interest by every definition of..." "I know." Dale finally looked me in the eyes, his jaw clenched. "You're not wrong, Ethan. But if I blow the whistle alone, it won't stick. Not without a pattern, not without liability bingo." He knew, he was afraid, but not paralyzed. That meant I had a potential ally, a hesitant one, but the kind who might talk if the walls started closing in. I just had to build the pressure. "Have you ever reviewed the HOA's liability coverage?" I asked casually. Curious what they'd say about enforcement programs that don't pass neutral evaluation standards. That made his eyes flicker again. "Where are you watching from?" Because from my view, I'd just found the first crack in Karen's armor. Not a break, not yet, but enough to start slipping a wedge in. I turned to leave. Dale didn't stop me. But just as I opened the door, he said, "Careful, Ethan. She's not just rewriting the rules. She's trying to make sure you're not around when she finishes." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because Karen had no idea that the person she was pushing into a corner was someone who spent his career designing systems for structural failure analysis. And this system, it was already starting to shake. By the time I got back to my office in town, the email was already waiting. Subject line, "Final compliance warning, immediate action required." I opened it on the dual monitor setup I used for engineering audits. The first thing I saw was the fine, $1,200 for non-compliance. Then a second charge, $350 per day until external violations are resolved. They were charging me retroactively. The clock had started ticking 2 days earlier, before the notice was even hand-delivered. Karen was pulling the same move she'd used on the Simmons family last month. Run the clock behind closed doors, then drop a hammer they couldn't escape. There was also a rental permit suspension notice, effective immediately. I called the county to confirm. She'd flagged my property as under enforcement review, triggering an automatic pause on my short-term rental status. And that meant one thing. I'd lose 2 weekend bookings, one of them prepaid for the full holiday rate. That wasn't just annoying, it was strategic. Karen had gone from passive-aggressive paper pushing to active interference. She wanted me financially cornered. I printed everything and laid it out across my drafting table. The visual made it worse. Fees, citations, code enforcement tags, rental disruptions, insurance red flag potential. The blueprint of a financial trap, designed not to break me at once, but to drain me drip by drip. And just like that, the victory strategy stopped being abstract. It became personal. Drop a like if you've ever had to fight to keep what should have been yours in the first place. And subscribe, because now it's more than a fight. It's a takedown. I reviewed my old notes. Whispering Pines HOA had a bundled liability policy, standard for communities like ours. If a resident filed a civil claim tied to HOA mismanagement, especially one tied to undisclosed financial conflicts of interest, the policy could be revoked or suspended. And if that happened, the board would be personally liable for any negligence claims, including the president. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed leverage. That's when I remembered a call I got last year from a surveyor hired by a real estate investor. They'd backed out of a deal on Karen's own property because of slope instability and possible sub-foundation runoff risks. I pulled up the old email. There it was. They'd CC'd me, asking for a second opinion that I never got around to giving. Now I had a reason to. If Karen's home was built on unstable grade and the HOA had modified nearby drainage infrastructure, and if my engineering expertise confirmed it, that wouldn't just be irony, that would be liability. My phone buzzed. Adam. They just canceled both bookings, he said. We're looking at nearly $1,000 in loss. You okay? I'm working on it, I said. They're playing dirty, so we're going to clean them out the smart way. Outside the window, snow had started falling again, light, powdery, silent. But I saw it for what it really was. The weight was coming, and I planned to let every ounce of it fall where it belonged. The next morning, I strapped on my field boots and drove the truck up the back access road near Karen's lot. It was still snowing, light but steady. I parked just above the HOA-maintained easement, a steep shared slope that funneled melt runoff into a narrow concrete culvert, a culvert I'd warned them about 2 winters ago. I stepped out and ran my fingers along the retaining wall. Hairline cracks, not new. The concrete was bowing ever so slightly, too subtle for an untrained eye. But I'd seen it 100 times in the field. Pressure, expansion, fatigue. A few feet downhill, the ground sloped toward Karen's property line. I followed it, stopping just short of her fence. And there it was. Subtle channeling. A sunken depression along the lower grade, where diverted runoff had eaten into the soil. I knelt down and brushed the snow aside with my gloved hand. Damp clay underneath. Not saturated yet. But one solid melt cycle, and this section could shift. What made it worse? A series of new decorative stone planters had been installed by the HOA 6 months ago, repositioned to beautify the slope. But they had also altered the runoff path, pushing water flow away from the drain and toward the base of Karen's foundation. In trying to modernize the slope's appearance, the HOA had created a long-term drainage risk, and Karen, as HOA president, had signed off on it. Subscribe if you've ever wanted to fight back with brains, not just anger, because what I'd just found was step 1 in building a case that would flip their power upside down. I snapped photos, measured offsets, marked the depression path. My boots crunched across frozen gravel as I walked the lower contour. From below, I could see Karen's rear deck, freshly stained, full of potted succulents and solar lights. But what caught my attention was the faint warping of the deck posts. Tiny lean, just a few degrees. But in my world, a few degrees can signal a 1,000-pound shift. I opened the elevation survey from last year on my phone, pulled up my old schematic overlay. The slope revision plan they used never went through a third-party inspection. It was HOA approved, internally, meaning any risk tied to it, squarely on their shoulders. And if a structural report from a licensed engineer flagged this as negligence, or worse, foreseeable damage, the HOA's liability policy could be suspended. Personal liability would kick in. I heard a crunch behind me. A neighbor's dog barked from a nearby yard. I turned, casually folding up my map. Nothing out of place, but I knew I had to be careful. If Karen got wind of what I was doing too soon, she'd spin it as harassment. Back in the truck, I reviewed the photos and started a new file. HOA infrastructure risk, runoff/culvert deviation. It wasn't just about one drainage issue. If I found 2 or 3 others, issues created under HOA sanctioned design changes, then I'd have a pattern, a paper trail of bad decisions with real-world consequences. That's when I remembered the Langston's neighbors, the Norrises, had complained about flooding near their retaining wall last spring. I hadn't thought much of it then. But now it might be domino number 2. Where are you watching from? Because this wasn't a witch hunt. It was a structural audit. And by the time I was done, Karen's mountain of bylaws wouldn't matter, because her own foundation might be the thing that crumbles first. Adam's VA appointments were always early. He liked it that way. Get in before the lobby filled up. I usually waited in the truck, grading blueprints or answering contractor emails. But that day, I couldn't focus. I was rereading the slope photos on my tablet when I saw Adam approaching the passenger side. He moved slower than usual, favoring his bad leg. His face was tight, unreadable. VA says the pressure ulcers are back, he said as he got in. From the new mattress. Should have stuck with the one from the cabin. My gut twisted. That mattress, hell, the entire setup, was in our guest room. We'd custom built it together during his rehab. He only moved out recently because we needed the rental income. The cabin kept him grounded. Safe. Out here? He was starting to slip again. I'm moving back in, he said, like it was already decided. Not full time, just a few weeks. The chair doesn't track well in my apartment hallway. I stared at the dash. Karen's rental freeze meant no income, and I couldn't house Adam and absorb a multi-$1,000 hit, not unless something gave. You're not going back into that cabin until it's cleared, I told him. They've frozen the permit. I'm being fined daily. We'd be flagged on insurance if anything happened. He paused. You didn't tell me that. I didn't want you carrying more than you already do. His eyes narrowed. So she's winning. Those words sat heavy, like a weight I couldn't shift. Because the truth was, Karen was winning. She was bleeding me with bureaucracy, weaponizing rules to push legacy residents out and replace them with compliant buyers. I wasn't the first, but if I didn't fight back here and now, I might be the last who could. Subscribe if you know what it's like to fight systems that hide behind silence and want to see how you bring them down from within. I drove us back in silence, but my mind was racing. The slope issue was step 1, but I needed to tie it to something visible, a consequence that homeowners could understand. If water flow was damaging structures beyond Karen's fence line, that was liability in action, especially if more than one property had signs of damage. That Norris's, maybe the Talbots too. That night, I opened my old inspection templates. I started a new one. I marked every HOA modified slope within a half-mile radius. Not just Karen's, 5 properties, all showing signs of improper diversion, most with minor damage already. If the insurance company saw that, they'd pull coverage. And once that happened, no board member would want to carry Karen's liability burden alone. Adam wheeled into the kitchen. Need help with anything? I looked at him, scarred, tired, but solid. I thought about Dad, how he built that cabin as a way to start over after the plant shut down, how we buried his ashes at the edge of the tree line behind it. This ends with her out, I said. He nodded. Good. Because she doesn't just need to lose, she needs to pay. Where are you watching from? Because some fights aren't about pride, they're about legacy, family, and survival. And for people like Karen Langston, the real punishment isn't a fine. It's financial collapse, delivered with a license seal and a structural audit report. The diner sat at the edge of town, a worn-out little place where the biscuits were dry, but the walls had ears. Most of the HOA board informal meetups happened here, They called it breakfast quorum, unofficial decisions made over black coffee and overcooked eggs. I walked in just after 7. Dale was already seated at the back booth, shoulders hunched, stirring cream into a mug like it owed him money. "I've got 10 minutes, he said without looking up. "That's enough." I slid into the booth and laid out a copy of the slope map I'd annotated. He glanced at it, then scanned the photos I'd printed from the culvert walk. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the angle distortion on Karen's deck supports. "She said the new planters were cosmetic," he murmured. "Said the runoff would self-absorb into the hill." "Self-absorb?" I almost laughed. "She redirected snowmelt into clay." "That slope shifts under pressure, Dale. It's a landslide waiting to happen." He leaned in, voice low. "You're right. And if the insurance carrier finds out they approved changes without licensed review, we lose coverage. Bingo. Subscribe if you've ever had to get creative to hold someone accountable, because this plan, it's about to bend her entire empire in half." Dale checked the door behind me, nervous, still scared. "She's already called an emergency session," he said, "trying to get pre-approval for a discretionary fund. $40,000 in reserve. What's she planning to spend it on? Landscape reinforcement. To cover the runoff issue without admitting it's her doing." There it was. She knew. She'd seen the shift too. Or maybe someone else had flagged it, and now she was using HOA money to patch the risk before it could be used against her. "Show me the books," I said. "Just what's public. I'll do the math." He pulled out a folded spreadsheet. The ink was fading, but I could see the keyline items: slope beautification, insurance premiums, compliance consulting fees, all filtered through a Langston Property Partners invoice. "Langston Partners is Karen," Dale admitted. "She owns it, doesn't disclose it to members, says it's external consulting. But the money flows in a circle." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. She was laundering board funds through her own business. That wasn't just unethical. It was grounds for recall, maybe worse. "You document this?" I asked. I tried. Motion for an audit. She tabled it. Board voted it down. I sat back, the strategy forming in real time. "If I get you a structural liability report and tie that to one of her approved projects, can you confirm that the funding came through without oversight?" Dale didn't answer at first, but his fingers drummed against the side of his coffee mug. Small, shaky movements, not weakness, guilt. "I'll back you," he said finally, "but only if you don't use my name until the board meets. I've still got equity in this community. My daughter lives 2 streets down fair enough. We shook hands under the table like criminals. But this wasn't crime. This was cleanup. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever been boxed in by people who hide behind rules they wrote themselves, just know, every system has a weak point, and sometimes all you need is someone on the inside with just enough conscience left to crack it open." I rolled the blueprint scroll flat across my workbench, weighted it down with a wrench on one corner and an old coffee mug on the other. Across the table, my laptop screen showed side-by-side images. One of Karen's slope, the other of the drainage culvert I inspected days ago. I clicked between them, syncing elevation data with the HOA's own landscaping maps. Thank you, public records request. I didn't need to guess anymore. The GIS overlays confirmed it. The slope remodel Karen approved had deviated from standard runoff redirection principles. Worse, it ignored a topography shift I'd flagged in a 2021 maintenance recommendation, one she and her board deprioritized in their meeting notes. Now, that oversight had turned into a structural threat, one supported by geotagged field images and formal elevation measurements from my licensed drone survey. Evidence, not suspicion, not theory, proof. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to play chess while the other side is throwing checkers, and subscribe, because this is the part where the board flips. I opened a fresh PDF template: preliminary hazard certification, surface instability, community managed slope. I filled in the metadata, attached field evidence, and keyed in my seal code. The report would show slope deviation, soil movement trends, and runoff impact zones. But I wasn't just filing a hazard report. I was preparing a strategic detonation. Next, I created a second file. This one had no diagrams, just screenshots of Dale's spreadsheet showing HOA funds flowing to Langston Property Partners. Karen had signed the checks herself. Combined, the two files told a very different story than what Karen had sold the neighborhood. A story of negligence, profit, and risk, all wrapped in a shell of aesthetic enforcement. From the garage, I grabbed the portable laser transit, loaded it in the truck, and drove out to the Talbots' lot. Mrs. Talbot waved from the porch as I scanned her lower retaining wall. Small cracks, minor but directional. Same path as the shifted runoff. Same problem. Another house, another risk. Pattern established. That night, I added her reading to the master file, built a community risk overlay, and ran a simulation. Heavy snow accumulation, followed by rapid melt. 3 structures showed risk under the HOA's modified design, including Karen's. I sat back, feeling the weight of what I'd built. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. Karen wanted everyone to think in fines and fences, but her real weakness wasn't legal. It was financial. And once the insurance carrier got this report, her premium would triple if they didn't drop her entirely. Adam wheeled into the workshop with 2 mugs of cocoa. Still going? Almost there. Need me to call the news yet? Not yet, I said. But soon. I uploaded the report package to a private drive, labeled it HOA Structural Risk, Board Negligence Flag, sealed. Then I wrote a brief cover letter, addressed to the HOA's insurance provider. I didn't send it yet. This wasn't the kind of war you rushed. First, I had to give Karen just enough rope. Where are you watching from? Because the most dangerous thing you can give to someone corrupt is the illusion that no one's watching. I spent the next 3 days walking, not marching, not protesting, just walking, trail to trail, porch to porch, clipboard in hand, the same clipboard Karen used for years like a weapon. But this time, it was a shield. The first visit was the Talbots. I showed Mrs. Talbot the scan from her retaining wall. I explained how the water wasn't supposed to be hitting her east side. She already knew that, deep down. She'd been paying for concrete patchwork every spring. I didn't ask her to sign anything. I just showed her the simulation. She said, "If Karen tries to call this property non-compliant again, I'll be ready." The next stop was the Norrises. They were newish, 2 kids, trying to make it work with a single income and a short-term rental side hustle. Karen had fined them for the roofline contrast between their original cabin and the newer expansion. What she hadn't told them? That the moisture seeping into their subdeck wasn't from faulty flashing. It was from redirected runoff. Hers. Drop a like if you've ever had to stay quiet just to keep the peace, but now you're ready to speak loud. And subscribe, because that moment's coming. I showed them the slope maps, the report highlights. I even ran a quick level check along their back edge. They didn't need convincing. By the time I visited the 4th house, I had what I needed. 4 affected homes, 4 households prepared to submit affidavits confirming damages tied to HOA-controlled landscape changes. I didn't ask them to take sides. I just asked for truth. And quietly, they gave it. Back in my office, I built a new file, homeowner declarations, drainage pattern displacement. Each one was simple, 1 paragraph. No legal jargon, just the date, name, and confirmation of observed changes to slope stability, water direction, or resulting damage, after Karen's beautification project. At the bottom of each file, I added a tag. Potential financial exposure, if HOA liability policy is voided. Elevated risk of personal loss. Where are you watching from? Because this isn't about throwing stones. It's about removing them from the mountain before they become an avalanche. The final step was quiet. I forwarded a copy of my sealed engineering report to a friend at the county building office. Not official, not submitted, just reviewed. I asked if it raised enough questions to merit inspection. He replied within hours, yes. This qualifies for preliminary notice. If complaints align, the HOA could face audit no threats, no speeches, no blow-ups, just pressure. Invisible, steady, calculated pressure. Karen thought she could bury people under bureaucracy. She never expected someone who'd built foundations for a living. The The meeting wasn't scheduled to start until 6 p.m., but I arrived at the Whispering Pines Community Center by 4, not to stake out a seat, but to prepare the ground. I placed one sealed envelope at each of the 7 board seats. Inside each, a single-page letter, notarized, outlining 3 key points. An engineer-certified hazard report tied directly to HOA, Managed Land Potential Personal Liability, should insurance lapse or be revoked. Official request for clarification on undisclosed payments to Langston Property Partners. No threats, no demands, just facts. Written in language clear enough for a board member or a court. Karen arrived at 5:30, clipboard in hand, sunglasses still on indoors, like always. I watched her scan the room, watched her pause when she noticed the envelopes, and watched her lips tighten when she spotted me, seated calmly in the second row. I nodded, no words. She walked faster after that. Subscribe if you've ever waited calmly while someone realized they weren't in control anymore. And stay with me, because what comes next? That's the break. Behind me, the Talbots came in, then the Norrises, then 2 other neighbors who'd never been to a meeting in 5 years. That's how you knew something had shifted, when people started showing up before the trouble started. Dale entered last. He didn't speak to Karen, just walked straight to his chair and opened his envelope. He didn't look shocked, just relieved, like someone else had finally put on armor too. At 6:03 p.m., Karen called the meeting to order. I'd like to begin with a motion to adopt the new enforcement escalation schedule, she said, and to approve emergency landscape stabilization funds from the reserve. Before that, Dale interrupted, flat and steady, I think we should review the contents of the certified packets placed in front of you. Karen blinked. Excuse me? They're from Ethan Ridgway, licensed structural engineer, resident, former vendor to the county inspection board. A silence fell, the kind that tightens the air in your chest. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, arms crossed, letting the silence settle in. Karen opened her packet. As her eyes moved down the page, something changed in her posture. Her mouth moved, but no words came. She flipped the page over, blank. The facts were all right there, front-loaded, unavoidable. Dale looked at the rest of the board. I recommend tabling all enforcement decisions until this matter is reviewed by legal counsel and the HOA's insurer. Any action taken without review may expose us individually to liability. And just like that, the tone of the room shifted. No raised voices, no confrontation. Just Karen, boxed in by policy, risk, and evidence. No rules to twist, no bylaws to manipulate. Just a simple, hard wall she hadn't seen coming. Where are you watching from? Because the thing about building walls to keep people in line is that sometimes those same walls become your cage. And this cage, it was just starting to close. The back door of the community center opened with a hiss as more neighbors poured in. Late arrivals who'd heard the buzz. Word had spread fast. Karen's seat remained motionless as the board passed Ethan's sealed reports from hand to hand. The other members were quiet, flipping pages with careful fingers. One reached for their phone. Another whispered to the vice chair. Then someone from the back stood up. Is it true? Mr. Norris asked. Did the HOA alter the slope behind our homes without licensed review? Karen cleared her throat. We followed community-approved landscaping standards. With whose signature? I asked from my seat. Karen froze. If it wasn't inspected by a certified engineer, and it wasn't reviewed by the county, then it falls on the board. Specifically, the person who authorized the project. I turned to the crowd. For those who don't know, I'm Ethan Ridgway. I've lived here since I was 12. My father built our cabin before this HOA existed. I'm also a licensed structural engineer who's helped design flood mitigation systems for 5 counties. And what I found on this property? Violations, drainage rerouting, soil degradation, and now, physical damage to at least 4 homes. Subscribe if you've ever watched someone choke on their own lies in public. And if you want to see how this wraps up, stay tuned. We're not done. A murmur rippled through the room. Then Dale stood up. As treasurer, he said, I'm obligated to inform the community that recent payments, totaling over $40,000, were directed to a private company called Langston Property Partners. That company is owned in full by HOA President Karen Langston. Gasps. One woman covered her mouth. Karen stood, finally. I've followed every procedure. Those contracts were board reviewed. They were tabled, Dale said, voice rising. You called emergency votes, then blocked motions for external review. You used HOA funds to cover up your own design flaws that are now threatening property value and insurance coverage. Where is this coming from? Karen snapped. You're all being manipulated by one disgruntled homeowner. I stood. I have 4 signed declarations from affected homeowners, a certified structural hazard report, and a confirmation of interest from a county inspector. You think I need to manipulate people, Karen? She opened her mouth again, but someone shouted from the back. Did you use our dues to fix your backyard? Silence. Then another. I paid $2,800 in fines last year. And you're funneling money to your own company? Call the vote, someone yelled. Special recall motion. Now. Karen's veneer cracked for the first time. Her jaw clenched. She sat back down. Hard. Dale cleared his throat. Per bylaw section 3.4, if 5 residents support a motion for emergency board restructuring, a vote may be held immediately. I have 7 signatures. Beat passed. Then someone started clapping. Another joined, and then it spread, like thunder in a dry canyon. Karen didn't speak again. The motion passed with all hands but hers. Where are you watching from? Because when systems crack, they don't do it quietly. They fall with sound. And when the weight finally lands on the person who built the pressure, it's not injustice, it's math. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of the chimney again, my father's cap still there, soot-streaked and solid. I ran my hand over the stonework, just like he used to. The mountain air was cold, but it wasn't biting anymore. The board voted Karen out that night. Unanimous. Dale was appointed interim president. And within days, the HOA's insurance carrier received my report, along with a quiet warning from the county that an audit would follow if the board didn't self-correct. Karen didn't even fight it. She left a single resignation email, 3 lines long. No apology, just withdrawal. But the silence said enough. Langston Property Partners was removed as a vendor. A third-party firm was brought in to assess all recent slope modifications. I stayed out of it, except for one thing. I offered free consultation to any homeowner concerned about drainage risks. No charge, no paperwork, just help. Drop a like if you believe that doing what's right doesn't need a price tag. And subscribe, because this isn't the last HOA takedown I'll be part of. The fines against my cabin were reversed. The permit freeze lifted. Adam moved back in the next weekend, rolling through the widened doorway we built together years ago. He parked himself on the porch with his favorite book and didn't say a word for the first half hour. That was how I knew he was finally at peace. Later that night, I found the old photo Dad kept. Him standing beside the original chimney cap, arm around me at age 10, both of us covered in ash. I framed it and hung it in the entryway. A reminder of what we fought for. Not just property, not just peace, but memory. The kind you can't measure in square footage or siding color. The kind no bylaw should ever be allowed to erase. We still get HOA newsletters, though they read differently now. No threats, no passive-aggressive line items, just updates, budgets, invitations. The community changed because people stopped staying quiet. They stopped assuming the rules were untouchable. And when Dale asked if I'd ever consider serving on the board myself, I said no. I've spent my life designing systems to hold weight. I'd rather leave the politics to someone else. But I'll keep watching. Because that's what you do when the legacy you protect was built stone by stone, not signed into a policy packet. Where are you watching from? If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because the next fight might be yours.